The morning sun spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my downtown apartment, turning the glass table into a sheet of gold. I sat there, barefoot, silk blouse still crisp from yesterday's dry cleaning, sipping my coffee as the city hummed below me. To anyone looking in from the outside, my life looked perfect, curated even. The phone buzzed against the marble counter, and I almost ignored it. Almost. It was a name I hadn't seen in years. Emily Carter. For a moment, I just stared at it, my thumb hovering over the screen. My chest tightened, and suddenly I was 22 again, standing in a crowded kitchen, being laughed at, dismissed, pitted. I shook the thought away and answered with the same calm tone I use in board meetings. "Emily," I said, letting my voice stay smooth. She hesitated. "Hi, Claire. I, heard about your new company. I was wondering if we could meet. Everyone's been talking about you." I smiled faintly, a mix of pride and irony. "Everyone's talking now, huh?" I turned my gaze to the skyline, the glass towers gleaming like trophies. "Sure," I said softly. "Let's talk." Inside, though, my heart thudded because I knew this meeting wasn't just coffee. It was the reckoning I'd been waiting for. It's strange how a single phone call can rip you backward in time. The moment Emily's name flashed on my screen, I was back in that cramped kitchen of my parents' house in Ohio, the night everything cracked open. I was 22, broke, and living on instant noodles and minimum wage paychecks. My parents had called a family dinner. I thought maybe it was to encourage me. I was wrong. Emily was there too. She was dating my brother back then. She leaned against the counter, perfectly put together as always, while my mother stood with her arms crossed. "Claire," Mom started, in that tone that always made me feel smaller. "We just don't understand why you won't do something sensible. Nursing school is right there. Your cousin offered to get you in." I swallowed hard. "Because that's not what I want, Mom. I want a design. I'm building a portfolio." Emily laughed, just a little, but enough for everyone to hear.
"Design?"
"Claire, you can't even pay rent. You think you're going to be the next Vera Wang." The room filled with snickers, my brother shaking his head like I was some hopeless child. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, my throat tight. Dad sighed. "We just don't want to watch you waste your life. You're almost 23. When are you going to grow up?" Something inside me broke, or maybe it clicked into place. I looked at all of them, the people who were supposed to believe in me, and felt a wave of cold clarity. "You know what?" I said, voice shaking but steady. "You'll see. One day, you'll all see." I grabbed my jacket, stormed out, and drove to the only person who had ever made me feel like I wasn't crazy, my grandmother. She didn't ask questions when I showed up crying. She just handed me her old sewing machine, the one she'd used to make my mom's prom dress, and said, "If this is your dream, baby, then fight for it. Make them regret laughing." I stayed up all night staring at that machine, my tears drying into something else. Resolve. That night with my grandmother's sewing machine was the start of everything. I spent weeks teaching myself patterns from YouTube, practicing until my fingers ached, burning myself on the iron more times than I could count. I worked 2 jobs, cashier by day, waitress by night, and sewed in the hours everyone else slept. The first dresses I made were awful. Uneven seams, zippers that stuck. But little by little I got better. I started selling on Etsy, just a few pieces at first. When I made my first sale, I cried, not because it was a lot of money, but because someone out there believed in me enough to pay for what I'd made with my own hands. It wasn't glamorous. I was exhausted all the time. My friends stopped inviting me out. My brother texted me once, saying, "Hope this little hobby of yours is worth it." But every time I wanted to quit, I would run my hand over the smooth metal of that sewing machine and remember my grandmother's words. Make them regret laughing. Then came Mrs. Lawson. She was a retired fashion buyer who wandered into the cafe where I worked. I was wearing one of my own dresses that day, a mustard yellow wrap dress. She complimented it, asked where I'd bought it, and when I told her I'd made it myself, she asked for my card. 2 weeks later, she introduced me to a boutique owner looking for new designers. That was my first real break. The boutique sold out my pieces in 3 weeks. Then came custom orders, then collaborations. I reinvested every dollar back into my business, new fabrics, better equipment, a tiny rented studio I could barely afford. I kept quiet online. When my family asked how I was doing, I'd say, "I'm fine," and change the subject. I didn't post photos of my work, didn't share the wins. Something about keeping it to myself made it feel safer. By the time I turned 28, I had my own clothing line. A real company. I signed my first major deal with a department store chain and moved to Chicago. I remember standing in my first real office, exposed brick, floor-to-ceiling racks of my designs, and thinking, this is it. This is the life they swore I'd never have. But even then, I didn't tell them. Not yet. Because part of me wanted the reveal to be perfect. I wanted them to see not just that I'd survived, but that I had built a life so beautiful, so untouchable, that they couldn't help but envy it. Emily's text said they'd be in Chicago for the weekend and wanted to stop by my place of work. I smiled when I read that. Place of work. 3 days later, I stood in my office, arranging fresh peonies on the corner table. The room smelled faintly of bergamot candles and new leather. Sunlight poured in from the massive windows, catching the gold lettering on the glass wall that read Claire Bennett's studio. I heard the elevator ding. My assistant, Jordan, buzzed me. "Your guests are here," she said softly. When they stepped in, the room went quiet in that way it does when people are suddenly out of their depth. My mother was the first to speak. "Wow," she murmured, taking in the racks of gowns, the sketches pinned to the wall, the awards lined neatly on the shelf. Emily looked almost comically out of place, her designer handbag clutched too tightly. My brother just stood there, jaw slightly slack. "Claire," my dad started, his voice unusually careful. "This is yours?" I didn't rush to answer. I let them take it all in. The custom dress form in the corner wearing next season's collection, the sleek computer screens with pre-order numbers climbing in real time, the signed contract framed near my desk. Finally, I smiled and said simply, "Yes. All of it." Emily blinked, trying to find words. "I didn't realize you'd made it this far." "I know," I said gently, tilting my head. Most people didn't. I gestured for them to sit. My assistant brought sparkling water in crystal glasses, and for a moment, we all just listened to the quiet hum of the city outside. "I wanted you to see this," I said finally, my voice calm, even. "Not because I need your approval, I don't, but because I remember what you all thought of me. And I think you should see what became of the girl you called a disappointment." No one spoke for a long moment. My mother's eyes were wet. My brother cleared his throat but said nothing. Emily finally managed a small, awkward laugh. "Well, Claire, I guess the joke's on us." I leaned back in my chair, the leather cool against my shoulders. "Not a joke," I said softly. "Just proof." The silence that followed was different, heavier, more respectful. They weren't mocking me anymore. They couldn't. I let the silence stretch, just long enough for the weight of the moment to settle. For years, I had rehearsed this in my mind, what I'd say if they ever came back into my life. Now that they were here, I didn't want anger to speak for me. I wanted clarity. "You know," I said slowly, "when I walked out of that kitchen 6 years ago, I wasn't just leaving the house. I was leaving the version of me you all thought I had to be. That girl, the one you laughed at, she built this." I gestured around the studio. My brother shifted uncomfortably. "Claire, we were just worried." "No." I cut him off gently but firmly. "You weren't worried. You were embarrassed. There's a difference." And I carried that shame for years, until I decided it wasn't mine to carry anymore. My mother's eyes dropped to her lap. Emily stared at the floor. "So here's what I need from you," I continued. "If you want to be part of my life now, really part of it, you're going to have to start respecting it. No more comments about what I should have done. No more jokes about my choices. And if you want to stay close, I expect you to show up for me the way I showed up for myself." I looked directly at Emily. "And that goes for you too. I don't care if you and my brother are still together or not. If you're in my orbit, you treat me with respect." Emily nodded quickly, Her cheeks flushed. My dad cleared his throat. Claire, we didn't know, we didn't realize how much we hurt you. I gave a small, almost sad smile. I know you didn't, but now you do. And if you want a relationship with me, with this version of me, it starts with an apology. For a long moment, no one moved. Then my mother reached across the table and took my hand. I'm sorry, Claire, she said softly, her voice cracking. I really am. Something in me softened, not enough to erase the past, but enough to let the healing start. Good, I said quietly. Then we can move forward, but on my terms. The next few weeks felt different, lighter. My parents started calling me, not to lecture but to ask about my work, my travels, the next collection I was launching. My brother even showed up at one of my pop-up events and stayed the entire afternoon, carrying bags for customers. Emily sent me a handwritten note, apologizing again, this time without excuses. And while part of me still kept a cautious distance, I could feel something shifting. They were trying, really trying, and that meant more to me than I expected. One evening, after a long day at the studio, I sat alone in my apartment with a glass of wine. The sewing machine my grandmother had given me sat in the corner, polished, but worn from years of use. I ran my fingers along its smooth edge and smiled. That machine had carried me through every low moment, every night I doubted myself, every tear-streaked morning when I almost quit. I whispered, almost to myself, we did it. The next morning, I framed my grandmother's note, the one she had tucked into the sewing machine years ago. Fight for your dream. Make them regret laughing. And as I hung it on my office wall, I realized I wasn't fighting anymore. I had already won. I turned to the window, the Chicago skyline glittering like a field of stars, and said softly, as if the whole city could hear me. They mocked my life, and now they envy it.